My name is Dr. Rachel Golden Kroner. I'm a fellow at Conservation International, focused on environmental governance, and I'm a co-chair of the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas Taskforce, focused on COVID-19 and protected and conserved areas. The onset of the COVID-19 pandemic changed all of our lives. We started working from home, purchasing masks, and focusing on our health. The effects cascaded as the pandemic spread, disrupting economies, livelihoods, public health, and so much more. One lesson that the pandemic reminds us of is something that scientists have warned about for decades. The destruction of nature, including intact ecosystems, increases the risk of the emergence of zoonotic diseases, like the virus that causes COVID-19. But on the other hand, the protection and conservation of ecosystems can help dampen the risk of the emergence of future pandemics. Protected and conserved areas can also help us multi-solve for the overlapping crises that we face, including the climate and biodiversity crises. As COVID-19 spread throughout the world and following the immediate relief period, governments started to set in motion massive economic recovery efforts amounting to trillions of dollars. At the same time, there were consistent calls to build back better and include nature-positive funds in stimulus packages. So the key question remains, are we building back better? And how are decisions made by governments affecting those vital protected and conserved areas? With a team of 16 researchers from countries across all continents, we explored this question. We reviewed COVID-era policies and economic recovery plans that were pledged or advanced between January and October of 2020. The study was part of a special issue of Parks, which focused on COVID-19 and protected and conserved areas. And the special issue included more than 150 contributors, 11 peer-reviewed studies, and essays from leading voices. In our study on Building Back Better, we found a few things. First, we found that 22 countries, including most of the world's major economies, proposed or advanced decisions that would roll back or weaken environmental protections or reduce budgets for conservation efforts. We identified 64 examples of these rollbacks across all continents that, if implemented, would open up new areas to mining and logging, clear forests for housing developments, fragment rivers, large hydropower dams, and infringe upon the rights of indigenous peoples. These rollbacks were especially concentrated in Brazil, India, and the United States. And some government officials even admitted to taking advantage of the pandemic to remove environmental protections and also change procedures to limit public participation. These decisions could increase the conditions that put us at risk of a future pandemic by degrading ecosystems and increasing the likelihood of zoonotic disease spillover. On the other hand, we found that some governments have pledged investments in efforts to support protected and conserved areas, demonstrating that it is possible to make nature-positive investments through green stimulus efforts. We found that 9 countries and the European Union pledged $12.7 billion in direct support for protected and conserved areas, while 10 countries pledged $14.4 billion in more indirect support. And these activities include restoration, sustainable agriculture, natural capital and the circular economy, nature-based tourism, green and blue infrastructure, and new ecosystem protections. New Zealand, for example, pledged significant investments to create 11,000 jobs in support of wetland, riverbank, and biodiversity restoration, as well as pest and public land management. And Pakistan's Green Stimulus Initiative includes plans to expand protected areas and launch its first National Park Service while creating 5,000 new jobs. Overall, we found that more countries rolled back protections or budgets for protected and conserved areas than pledged support during this period. And investments in nature have largely been neglected in stimulus packages. Our findings are consistent with reports by Vivid Economics, whose most recent report found that in the G20 countries overall, more stimulus funding was pledged toward activities that would undermine nature protections rather than those that support it, including subsidies for fossil fuels and unsustainable development projects that would destroy biodiversity habitats. Continued monitoring of these stimulus packages is needed to ensure that the more recent and new pledges live up to government's commitments and meet the moment. So what needs to happen next? Well, we need to recognize first that nature is the solution to help reduce the risk of zoonotic disease emergence, support our mental and physical health, jobs and livelihoods, as well as, of course, biodiversity and climate protections. We need to ensure that we're including support of new and existing conservation areas in COVID recovery strategies by funding programs that simultaneously protect and restore natural ecosystems, which can provide jobs and bolster environmental protections. Governments also need to ensure support for effective and equitable protected and conserved areas, with increased funding to strengthen conservation area management, promote the inclusive and diverse governance and funding mechanisms, and diversify livelihoods. And we need to ensure that these efforts do no harm and avoid setbacks by avoiding the rollback or weakening of budgets or regulations in protected and conserved areas, including the rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities. The benefits are clear if we do this right. We can build a more just, equitable, and sustainable future for all, while protecting all life on Earth and mitigating climate change. The upcoming negotiations of the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Climate Convention represent key opportunities as well to increase ambition in support of conservation areas. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to get this right, and the time for action is now. You can read this research and more in the Park special issue on COVID-19 and protected and conserved areas, and check out our task force's website to learn more about the impacts of the pandemic on protected and conserved areas and our recommendations.